Okay, here we go. What we want to do is make sure that everyone feels completely comfortable in what these shifts are and how they would articulate them to everyone else, because it's our responsibility of leaders to be able to articulate it to our staff, our students, our parents, anyone that's involved within our school communities. So here we go. Shift number 1, the balance of informational and literary text. Here are 2 questions to think about, and I want you to be able to share these answers kind of out loud with me. The first is, what percentage of college career texts do you think are informational? Let's just hear percentage numbers. 100%. 95? 75. Any other takers? Okay. It turns out that in general, it's 80% or more. 80% or more of everything you encounter in college and career is informational text, which leads us to the second question. What percentage right now do you think most elementary and middle school reading is for informational text? 15? 35? Higher? Lower?
I don't know.
Good guess. Research says right now that in general, elementary is only 7% informational and middle is only 15%. This is a huge problem, and we get to the problem of the goldfish. Has anyone ever won a goldfish before? Yes. I won a lot because I grew up in East Tennessee and we had lots of fairs. What happens when you try to keep your goldfish and put it into a fish tank? It dies. It goes belly up very quickly. The reality is that goldfish dies because it has the shock of a new environment that it is not prepared to handle. And so almost always trying to change that environment leads them to go belly up. This is what we are doing to our children. We are having them go into college or into that career with a shock of an environment they are not prepared to handle because we haven't started soon enough giving them that exposure to informational text. And if we don't change this, we have the problem that we see right now in California, where over 40% of the students go belly up. So we need to prevent goldfish, or our children from turning into goldfish. Here's how Common Core tries to address it. It says we must look and expose students to informational text at an earlier age. In K to 5, that balance should be 50-50. That throughout the day, they are exposed to 50% literature and 50% informational text. By 8th grade, it's a 45-55 balance, so 55 on the informational text. By 12th grade, that it would be 30-70, so that they could make the jump then to 80 by the following year. So this is the first one, the idea that we have to expose them at an earlier age and expose them to where they're getting to independent comprehension of it, not that we're hand-holding them through every time they see an informational text. Shift number 2, building knowledge in the disciplines, and this is what I was just kind of referring to with Paul for a minute ago. What this means is literacy extends beyond our reading class or our literature class, and everyone in our building needs to understand their role in literacy. It does not mean that every other teacher is teaching them how to read. What it means, though, is they have to teach them how to comprehend the unique type of literacy in their field. So, for example, if you're reading articles in math, it has a unique type of literacy because you have to understand how tables and graphs fit into the words on the page. And it's the math teacher's responsibility to expose them to that and to show them how to do that. If you're thinking about science, you have diagrams and charts and different things that are labeled throughout science texts. It's important that the science teacher teaches the students how to bring that information together to understand. And again, for social studies, the example I gave before, primary source documents, that they're exposed to those documents. Again, none of this means buying new resources. You already have a lot of this information in your math and your science and social studies text. There's also a website, and I'll have to get it for you because I don't remember what it is right now, but it's through the Library of Congress that lets you for free access any primary source document that's out there. And you just put in the part of history or topic in social studies that you're interested in, and it'll bring up the document. Now, it would take the teacher to say, is this an appropriate level for my class, which we'll talk about next. So the next one really is that idea of how is it appropriate? How do I know if it's appropriate for my grade level? The staircase of complexity. Because Common Core has such perfect vertical alignment, you can see how you're just adding a teeny little piece every year if you looked at the standards before. In order to still grow cognitively, you have to make sure that students are exposed to the appropriate text complexity, and that complexity is increasing every year. We have not been doing this. Research shows that in the last 50 years, the type of text we use in the classroom has significantly decreased in its complexity. Think of literature circles. How do they try to differentiate? They go, oh, this one can handle the on-level text. I'm going to give this one an easier one, and I'm going to give this group an easier one still. We're not exposing them to the right complexity. When students have difficulty with grade-level text, we don't reduce the complexity, we give them more support. Graphic organizers, what other pieces of support to help them access that text? But we can't reduce the level. So how can teachers do this? Text complexity has 3 different pieces to it: qualitative, quantitative, and the reader and task. Mostly teachers are just familiar with the quantitative. In other words, you stick it into Accelerated Reader or Lexile or any of those that generates a number for you that says the grade level that text might be on. That is important to know, and it's very helpful. And it turns out the Accelerated Reader website now, you can cut and paste an informational text in, and it'll give you the quantitative number for that informational text too, which is great. But that only is telling you word length, sentence length. Word frequency means even if it has difficult words, if it's the same difficult word over and over, that's easier than if it's a new difficult word every page. So teachers are familiar with this, but they have to look at 2 more pieces. The qualitative means you have to look at how that text is organized. For example, a story in chronological order is much easier to understand than one that has flashbacks, or is told out of order in any way, or has a subplot to it. You need to know about their necessary prior knowledge. Are there certain, especially cultural references that they would need to understand to access that text? Multiple levels of meaning. For example, Grapes of Wrath. If you put that into Accelerated Reader to get the ATOS level for it, it's 4th grade. No one would tell you that Grapes of Wrath is appropriate for 4th grade because of this qualitative piece. It has multiple levels of meaning that are going on that make it more complex. And then the maturity of the content, whether it's appropriate for that age level. So when teachers are picking the appropriate text, they can't just look at the number, they have to consider these pieces as well. And there's one more, the reader and task. You have to know what's actually happening in your classroom. What is the actual prior knowledge of the people in your classroom? Because if I went into the inner city, that prior knowledge may be very different than if I went into an affluent area or an area that's near an engineering town or near other things to where they might have a different level. And then what is the level of task I'm asking of them to do with this text? So I might be able to use a harder task if my task is a little easier or vice versa. Okay, so these are things that teachers have to consider. Does this take work? Absolutely. That's why this process is drawn out so that we can help build it into it. Shift 4 is text-based answers. Common Core says that we have to get away from talking just about our experience. This happened because when we went to school, they said make connections to the test, right? Almost everyone in the classroom has like making connections, text to self, text to world, things like that. So we got really into experiential things. The problem with that is anybody can make that connection even if they never read a word on a page. We need to know that they can read and look and analyze the words on the page. So we need to have them prove and talk about their answers with evidence that's from the text and referring to the text so that they're supporting these idea of arguments rather than personal experience. Here's an example, and I'll just go over, this is actually from the Common Core website, but I'll just go over the middle one. Letter from Birmingham Jail, used all the time in middle school to talk about. A common question we would have asked in the past was, after reading it and about nonviolent protest, write about a time when you felt or fought against something that was unfair. You could see how that easily could have happened in your classrooms. Change that up to now saying, now that you've inferred the letter that King wrote, or read the letter that King wrote, what can you infer about the letter that he received first? Looking at his responses, what must he have received first to make him respond in that way? That is an example of really looking at the text and using the text to answer them. So it's kind of a shift in how you might do that. Shift number 5 follows number 4. Number 4 is let's look at evidence when we're talking about it. Number 5 is now let's use that evidence when we're writing about it. So these two are very closely connected together, which means we need to do a lot more writing to inform and a lot more writing to make arguments is the word that they use, or opinions is the word they use in the lower grades, rather than so much narrative. It has a place, but we need to fit these others in as well. And finally, number 6, academic vocabulary. What % of words do you think you need to know in a text to be able to comprehend it on your own? We can shout them out again. What %? 93, that's good. Any others? 75. I thought around 70, 75. It turns out that you need 90 to 95%. 90 to 95% of words to be able to access that text. So when you're thinking about the complexity, that really comes into play. Here's the issue though. Most of the vocabulary, when we teach it in the classroom, we teach really, really specific words that they likely will never see outside of that unit again, like onomatopoeia, one of the coolest words known to man. But when in your life do you really talk about onomatopoeia unless you're an educator? Or words like in science thinking about mitochondria or nucleus or a lot of those things that are so specific. Not that they're not important to understanding that content, but you can't use and transfer that to understand lots of different text. Common Core says we need to teach them what are called Tier 2 vocabulary words. Tier 1 are the everyday words you just hear and speaking all the time. Tier 3 are the so specific you would only use it when you're teaching that lesson. Tier 2's in the middle. These are words that appear in all sorts of texts out there, but we don't usually speak with them. So if the students aren't exposed to them in writing, they may never hear them or know what they are. Things like the word discourse or theory or generation. I'm going to say go talk with each other, not have a nice little discourse at your table. So what Common Core says is we need to expose them more to Tier 2 words rather than focusing on the specifics. Okay, so those are the 6 shifts. Now at this point in the year, we're not talking about making them, we're just talking about do we understand them? Do we understand the fundamental move that Common Core is asking us to make to help prepare our students more for college and career? So I want you to think about these 6 shifts and think about which one is going to be most challenging for your faculty, and then how you might address that challenge in bringing it to them.